I'm Rob Casper. I'm the head of poetry and literature at the Library of Congress. I want to give a shout out to everybody who's here in the room, as well as those joining us via C-SPAN from across the country and around the world. I am pleased to introduce this event, Behind the Scenes with Black Writers, featuring Jericho Brown with Camille T. Dungy and Tiffany Unique. Jericho was last at the festival in 2019 to talk about his third and most recent book of poems, The Tradition, which went on to win the Pulitzer Prize in Poetry. He is the Charles Howard Candler Professor of English and Creative Writing at Emory University and the poetry editor of the magazine The Believer. Today, Brown is here to lead a discussion on the anthology he edited titled How We Do It, Black Writers on Craft, Practice, and Skill, which he describes as, quote, a book of answers to questions new writers ask every day about how to produce writing that proves their very identity as a writer. There were more than 30 contributors to How We Do It, and we're delighted to have two join Jericho on stage. Camille T. Dungy is the author of 4 poetry collections and 2 essay collections. She has also edited 2 anthologies, including Black Nature, 4 Centuries of African American Nature Poetry. Dungy is a university distinguished professor at Colorado State University. Tiffany Unique is the author of 2 novels, a book of short stories, and a poetry collection. Her book-length poem for children, I Am the Virgin Islands, was featured on the Center for the Book's Great Reads from Great Places list at the 2021 National Book Festival, and her novel, Monster in the Middle, made this year's Great Reads list. Unique is a professor of English and creative writing at Emory. Please join me in welcoming Jericho Brown, Camille T. Dungy, and Tiffany Unique.
Thank you so much, Rob, for that introduction. Can everybody hear me in the back? Oh, that's wonderful. I like it when people give me the thumbs up. That means go ahead. I like that. I'm doing something a little different. I've been starting whatever I do, even my mornings, with a poem. And so I'm going to recite a poem for you by a poet who gets mentioned a few times in this book that we're discussing today. It's a poet named Lucille Clifton. Cruelty. Don't talk to me about cruelty or what I am capable of. When I wanted the roaches dead, I wanted them dead and I killed them. I took a broom to their country and smashed and sliced without warning, without stopping, and I smiled the entire time I was doing it. It was a holocaust of roaches, bodies, parts of bodies, red all over the ground. They didn't ask my name. I didn't ask their names. They had no names worth knowing. Now I watch myself whenever I enter a room. I never know what I might do. I like that poem. I'm really happy to be here at the National Book Festival, but I am particularly happy to be sharing this stage with these writers that I admire so much, who I've known for a very long time, and who make me feel like a real person because I get to sit up here with these people. Tiffany Unique is my colleague at Emory University, and Camille Dungy is one of the first poets I ever met in my whole life. And so their work has meant a great deal to me, and I'm so glad that they could be in this anthology. So I just want to give them a hand and a thank you. And also, I want to say a thank you to Dana Williams and Darlene Taylor, who are in the audience. Darlene they are my co-editors. They are the people who came to me from Hurston Wright and from Howard University with the idea to put this anthology together. When they came to me with this idea, they told me that I could be the editor in name only if I wanted to be. But I wasn't going to do that because I didn't know what they were going to do with the book. And I was, when people ask you to do stuff, no matter what happens, you're going to be too busy to do it. The reason I decided to do this book, I wish I could say it was anything that had anything to do with my love of black people. I do love black people, but that's not why I decided to do this book. I decided to do this book because when they asked me, I understood that if I said no, I would not be able to control who they asked after me. And I didn't want to see this book come out with Greg Pardlow's name on it. It's true. So I put my hands very deep into the work that is this book, and I'm very proud of it. Does anybody in the audience have a copy of this book already? If you do, will you hold it up for me? I just want to see them. If you could hold them up. How y'all see that? Y'all see that? I'm very pleased with the work that this book has been doing in the world. I'm going to read you just a little bit, a very short piece from the introduction that'll give you some idea of how I mean for it to work. And then we'll hear from our guest panelists, our geniuses on stage. How We Do It is not a conventional anthology of craft essays. Our request of the writers in these pages was a statement quite literally explaining how they go about making what they make, what happens to move things from a blank page to a beautiful book. So this is a book of answers, answers to questions new writers ask every day about how to produce writing that proves their very identity as a practitioner. In other words, this is a book for anyone who is a student of the craft. More particularly, though, this is a book for younger and newer black writers in undergraduate and graduate workshops and in absolutely no workshop at all. We hope teachers find these words useful for their students, and we hope students who have yet to find their teachers learn from these 62 pieces born out of absolute generosity and hope for the future of black writing. I should stop here and say, my dream was to create this classroom where you could have the teachers you always wanted to have without you having to pay tuition. We have arranged this volume in a way that we hope to find supposed boundaries set by genre. I am certain there is news for the poet in the essay on vernacular by Daniel Black. I believe the poet Evie Shockley is indeed in conversation with the filmmaker Barry Jenkins. Barry Jenkins is the filmmaker who made the movie Moonlight, which if you don't like Moonlight, I don't like you. That certainty and that belief come from how much I learned about my own work and my own attempts at work from the process of reading and organizing these essays. This is a book I wish existed 20 years ago. I would have led an easier life if it had. How We Do It is divided into 8 sections with a range of essays in each: who your people, what you got, where you at, how you living, what it looked like, who you with, how to read, and going back. The titles here are intended to communicate the fact that these sections could not be narrowed down to the kind of jargon with which writers are accustomed. We weren't going to name the sections voice, tone, setting, character, or good advice. Because every essay here gets at more than any single topic. So I just wanted to start there, and I'll say this one last. This is at the end of the intro. In all, How We Do It is a kind of selfish gift. I want you to have what I always wanted. Here's an anthology that gives us modes to try on the way we might wear and change clothes. And these wonderful writers are proof that nothing ever beat a failure, but a try. Now, this is something my grandmother used to say. Nothing ever beat a failure, but a try. So just remember that anything you ever did well, you only did it well because you tried to do it. So if you don't try, you don't get anything. Y'all understand that? So I want to ask my panelists some questions, because there's a man with the time limit sign in front of me, because I'll just start talking. Camille and Tiffany, why do you think it is important for emerging black writers to read essays like the ones included in this book? Tiffany. Because they'll stare at each other.
Well, Camille's so pretty. I could just keep staring at her. Jericho, that was such an awesome introduction. Thank you. I also want to thank our ASL interpreter up here, who's vibes in so well. keeping up with what we're saying, but also with the pizzazz of the vernacular in which we're saying it. Did y'all see this? Like, that. That's good. Which is important to what we're talking about too, the importance of language, the importance of vernacular, the importance of the pizzazz that might be particular to Black vernacular. For me, this book is so important because growing up in the Virgin Islands, which is where I'm from, we have a rich history and a rich legacy of literature in the region, but the Virgin Islands is part, I will be politically correct and just say part for the moment, I might say other things on a different stage, but we are part of the United States, and because of that, I didn't grow up learning about Caribbean literature.
You should say that thing.
We are a colony of the United States. We're officially a territory of the United States, but we are the Virgin Islands of the United States, and that sort of highlights our colonial predicament. But as happens when you're in this particular predicament, you often don't read literature from the place that you're from. You don't experience cultural realities from the place that you're from, and a lot of your learning is about the place that owns you. So for me in the Virgin Islands, I learned a lot and read incredible literature written predominantly by white Americans and white British writers. So I didn't really see Caribbean writers, I did not see Black writers, I did not see Black Caribbean writers, African American writers. I didn't have those writers at my availability. So I actually thought that when I became a writer that I was gonna be the first one. That's how ignorant I was. I know, right? But that's colonialism. What that meant for me is that I felt lost the whole time. And I felt like I was constantly looking for who I would belong to and what literary tradition I might belong to. And I stumbled for years. And I feel like this book would have kept a younger me from stumbling quite so much. You know, the things I had to learn about what it meant to uphold Virgin Islands language as literary and as beautiful and not just available as the butt of the jokes in the fiction, but could be elevated to the poetics in the fiction. I didn't learn that until pretty late in my writerly journey. And if I'd had this book, I would have learned that earlier.
That's wonderful. I feel like one of the things that happens to writers of color, in particular, but also writers who have are not necessarily incorporating the marginalizing community's voices in their work is much of what Tiffany's been saying about looking for models, looking for pathways and guides that are available. But another thing that happens in the conversations about those writers' work, once we've actually figured out how to do it and established this, then when the conversations come back to us and when we're being interviewed, the questions have everything to do with our identity, with plot, with theme, and very little to do with craft, with how we built it. And so when I conduct an interview, I always make a point of asking specific questions about craft. And what I see from writers often is, thank you very much. All we've been talking about is the plot of this piece and not anything about how I built it. And that limiting nature of understanding myself as a maker of a craft, of an object that needs to be crafted with particular kinds of decisions, that if everything only gets put to theme, to topicality, it means that we miss truly the most crucial thing about how writing is built. And so having access to work on the craft by identifying people, right? Black identifying people, but all the aspects of the different ways that this craft is made and built is just an exciting thing to be part of and to have out there.
I remember when I was I went to graduate school at the University of Houston for my PhD, which is where I met Tiffany. We went to school together. And I had gone to get an MFA at the University of New Orleans where there was barely a reading series. And I remember at the University of Houston, you would have people like Sandra Cisneros and Naomi Shihab Nye and John Updike and Mary Oliver come give readings. And I was like, wow, you know. And I also very distinctly remember to your point, Camille, a reading that was given by Kevin Young and Yusef Komunyakaa. During the day, they came to the campus to answer questions, and people only asked them about jazz and blues. And it was very strange because one of them had mentioned, I think, Mingus in a poem. And because of that, the entire conversation for the day was about jazz and blues, which I don't mind. I want to talk about jazz and blues, but we never talked about their poems, which I think happens often to Black writers. And therefore, if you're a person in the audience trying to get the answers to your questions, you don't get them unless you want to play the trumpet. So, next question. As seasoned writers who teach others how to embrace their creativity, is there an essay that taught you something you hadn't before considered, or that made you stop and pause as you reflected on your own writing practice? If you haven't, yeah, that's the question.
Yeah, so that's an interesting, I don't think that the answer is something that I hadn't stopped to consider. My answer to that question is an essay by Evie Shockley, who is just a genius of our time. Nothing New, Black Poetic Experiment. And because there's nothing new, the idea that we are sort of out there experimenting with language and trying to sort of create a fresh way of seeing what has been there all along and reshaping it. That part wasn't new, but I was so grateful to some of the ways that Evie Shockley articulates the specific necessity of doing this kind of reframing and rethinking as a Black writer. And some of the ways that she talks about the history of violence and marginalization and erasure that is built into the language that we're using and the structures and forms that we're used to create the literature that we're writing, and how as Black writers we reimagine and twerk and shift and change as acts of resistance and empowerment and reclaiming. So there's just ways that Evie articulates that in this essay and then in her work that was just exciting to have that captured, right? Also, some of the things that are cool about this book is like, I love Evie Shockley's poems, and there's a really cogent, clear articulation of what's going on in her mind as she's creating those poems. And so that's exciting throughout the book to see that kind of action.
Yeah, I love this question because it allows us to hold up some of the geniuses in this book that are not on the stage here, but to like introduce you guys to some of these people too, which I think is really important. But it also, I hope, demonstrates that even those of us on the stage who we each have multiple books, we're each award-winning writers, professors already, you would think we have all of it together and we know everything. And yet we are also in the posture of continuing to learn and work hard on our craft, which is so important, especially given your comment earlier, Jericho, about the ways in which sometimes the content of our work is what gets held up and not the making of the work. To highlight that we continue to trouble through how to make literature that is more beautiful and more meaningful, that I am also learning from this book, I think is an important thing to hold up. The piece that I am right now actively learning from is by Marita Golden. And Marita Golden's essay is called How to Write a Memoir or Take Me to the River. And I'm currently writing a book of essays about how the Black body stays safe in the outside world, is not only in danger, but actually can stay safe. And I have been writing this very intellectually. The individual essays are very cerebral, maybe even academic, and I've really been resisting getting personal in the essays. But after reading Marita's passage, I am rethinking that hopefully with more bravery. And if it's okay, I want to read some of what Marita has written. So she writes here, "My father was the first man I ever loved." That is the first sentence of my book. The sentence is a confession and an invitation, one that roots the loves of my womanhood to the love I felt as a child. That sentence is in some ways an outline for the book. Writing a memoir forces you to take ownership of the story of your own life. Ownership means claiming your life and all its false starts and final reckonings. There are no half measures, no second guessing in a memorable memoir. This is who I was. This is who I am. These are the emotions I felt. This is my mother. This is my father. This is me. Writing a memoir means being prepared to evaluate your life and to uncover its terror and grace, to discover all that and shape it into a story. Memoir has allowed me to understand how much I love my parents, how much they love me, my strength and resilience, and the ways that my life is a reflection of the lives that all of us live. Now, Marita's essay and its continued brilliance has inspired me to think about this memoir of keeping the Black body safe, to also maybe include my own body and the ways in which my own body has been kept safe but also been thrust into danger, and to think about the ways, for me, vulnerably, that my mother was the first person to put my body into danger, and that her own instability made me a person who was in danger as a baby, as an infant, but that my mother also was the person who first put me into safety, because she also passed me to my grandmother, who was in our family a source of great stability and love for all of us, but in particular for me and my body. That's not something I would have been able to put into the memoir or even say on the stage if it had not been for Marita's essay.
Wow. Thank you. I should say here that Marita Golden is the founder of the Hurston Wright. Is Marita here by any strange chance? No, good, because I get embarrassed when I see her, because I was a student in the workshop, and every time I see her, I start turning red. She's like, this person among us that I just want to bow down to every time I see her. Is there anybody else here who has ever taken a Hurston Wright workshop or taught for the Hurston Wright workshops? Is it just me? Am I the only
I see one in a couple.
One here, one
see
over
some people
here,
over here.
one over here.
Let's just, the four of us, we can give Marita Golden.
Oh, I think all of us should.
Thank you always to Marita Golden.
But if I may, one of the things also about this anthology and about the Hurston Wright Foundation is the giving the flowers, right? It's naming a foundation for Black writers after Zora Neale Hurston and Richard Wright, creating a space where we honor the legacies. That's one of the awards of the Hurston Wright Foundation, is the Legacy Award. Here is the next and coming of this community of writers, and that this anthology, because you collect through the generations, right? You create this space for us to see this long tradition that goes backward and forward for ever, right?
And not only goes backward and forward, but also extends very wide left and right. I mean, in the title of this organization, it's Hurston Wright, two very different writers. So it's sort of letting you know that there is diversity in Black voices, and will be diversity in the Black voices who come out of or have anything to do with the organization, which I've always been really proud to be a part of. We're in a moment of book bans and other kinds of censorship. Some Black writers I know have even joked that one way to know you wrote something useful is some state legislator has tried to outlaw it. How much are you thinking or responding to this as you are writing now? What is the value of an anthology like this one in such an era?
Well, I will say that I'm not the type of writer that responds to what's happening much outside of my own heart and mind. And I want to write what feels like it's going to last forever and be important forever. And so I try not to write in response to like what is popular or normative or whatever, right? I want to write what's inside and what feels important. And if people don't read it right away, that's fine. Maybe they'll read it in 20 years, and that's even better. But the current political moment and the urgency with which I think it's important for us to hold up the importance of intellectual freedom, period, has made me want to write faster, to get the books out there more urgently. You know, it makes me realize that what I'm doing, although it might be private and personal and my artistic journey, that it is also important for everyone. And it makes me a little bit less precious about my writing as I think about my writing as something that has public import. So it makes me want to finish these books more quickly and focus on them. And my motherhood is very important to me. My friendships are very important to me. The role I have in my family and at my university is very important to me. But it's made me remember how important it is to just put the pen to paper and get the work out. So in that way, it's really put a fire under me.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I find most puzzling and unsurprising about
Thank you. Thank you for that phrase.
about so many of these book bans is the fact that many of the books are being banned because they represent lies that certain people don't want to have represented in the world. They don't want them to have the power of language and the power of being in a book which gives it a kind of authority. And that somehow there's this is the like puzzling, unsurprising, there's this idea that if these lives and these worlds are given the power of language, which is magic, that people will be like recruited and sort of made a certain way because they've read it, as opposed to what tends to happen, which is a recognition, right? You read a thing and you see also, I am also seeing myself there, or I'm also seeing someone who I love or could love in this guise. My essay in how we do it is really about writing with like a deep engagement with awareness, particularly awareness of the senses, which is so frequently what is important in good writing, is like just astute attention, right, to the world, and a world that wants to distract us all the time, wants to not have most of us paying attention, wants to not have people stop and really feel how everything is happening, who other people and who other beings and what the air is like. That's a world that it's easier to hoodwink people into thinking that we should all be alike, think alike, act alike, etc. A world that demands a kind of artistic attention, which well-written books offer and demand of us, is a very anti-authoritative world, and an expansive one. And for some people, that's incredibly scary. But for those of us who are kind of understand this, that's just the facts of how the actual world works, because we're paying attention, right? And so to me, I think I agree with that person's quote. Like, it does feel like whenever I see a friend of mine's books banned, I'm like, go you. Like, you touched a nerve with somebody, which means you're also touching hearts elsewhere, right? And that's what that's what's important.
Yeah, it's also, I have to say, Camille's essay is ultimately, I think, an essay about how to pay attention. Thank you for it. I'm about to ask you to read some of it. Is that okay?
I can
you
do
read
that.
some of it? And Tiffany's essay is about form, which often we think about form as it relates to poetry, but Tiffany's essay is an essay on form as it relates to fiction. And so Tiffany, Camille, if you could read just a little bit of your essay, I would appreciate it. And Tiffany, if you could follow with reading some of yours.
This kind of practice alters how you process your surroundings, which means your daily life, and how you write about that life. That's part of the power of heightened perception. You'll be able to feel and convey significantly more in less time. Consider how we react in a moment of crisis. People will often say something like, "It felt like it lasted forever." "That car crash lasted forever." When really it could only have been a matter of seconds. When you're in a moment of crisis, you start to pay animal bright attention to the things around you. Most of our lives, we tune out a lot. We tune out sounds and smells for sure. For instance, your underarm deodorant is likely scented, but after the initial application, can you smell it on yourself? That new laundry detergent, the odors that linger in your kitchen even when you're not in the middle of prepping a meal. Look around the room you're in right now. Paper, ink, wood, plastic, skin, metal, all these have smells, but your brain has likely tuned most of these smells out. We just don't pay attention most of the time. That's to be expected. We would be overwhelmed if we processed every sensory experience around us all the time. Unless something presents itself in a new or surprising manner, I have learned not to pay attention to what's around me. I go on, but when you're in a moment of crisis, an emergency, you do pay attention to a lot more. You smell and you hear and you see things you would have otherwise tuned out. What this means is that you might take in what seems like 30 minutes worth of material in just 30 seconds. You pay attention differently, more precisely. If you can start to practice this, you can begin to pay attention, really pay attention all the time by training yourself to grab 5 minutes worth of data in 1 minute, for instance.
Thank you. Thank you. One second, Tiffany. You held up a 15, but we're done at 4:30, but it seems like you would have held up a 15 at 4:15. You're just not gonna say that. Okay, Tiffany. It's okay. It's 4:07. Okay, come on, Tiffany.
As our gentleman figures that out.
I was just wondering if I had it wrong. I had it wrong, so we're not done at 4:30. You didn't hold up a 15. What did I have wrong? Come on, you taking my time. I'm done in 11 minutes.
Okay, all right, let me go fast.
11 plus 7 is not.
Okay, Jericho, come on. You're cutting into my time now. Camille, I'm gonna teach that essay.
Okay.
Yeah, because I'm teaching an environmental literature creative writing class this fall, and I'm gonna teach that. I think it's gonna be valuable. Okay.
I'm done at 4:18.
Jericho, you were cutting into my time.
Okay, I'm sorry. I have a thing with time.
I'm gonna read for 11 minutes. My essay is on fiction forms and the importance of fiction writers to interrogate forms in the way that poets have been trained to interrogate form. So I say here, one of the most taught and most familiar form is the hero's journey. And I've been in more than one classroom where the teacher has argued that the hero's journey is really the only fiction form. Maybe you've been in this classroom too. That the hero's journey is a form that is in all cultures and can be applied to all stories. Some writers and teachers have simplified this to say that all stories are a stranger comes to town or a hero goes on a journey, which is really just the same form with opposing perspectives. I disagree vehemently with the idea that there is one monoform for narrative. As I began teaching and even attempting to write within this form, its racist and sexist elements became clear to me. But racism and sexism aside, claiming that there is only one form is just another way to tell fiction writers not to worry about other influences and possible other interventions. It's a way to leave all the fun and profundity maybe to the poets. Novelists and short story writers, why should we do that? Here is one version of the hero's journey formula: the ordinary world, the call of adventure, the refusal of the call, traversing through the threshold, the belly of the whale, test allies, enemies, approach to the innermost cave, meeting with the goddess, the ordeal, atonement with the father, the road back, resurrection, return with the elixir, master of two worlds, freedom to live. You can look this up online. This is one example of the form. Now this, to be sure, is a useful way to craft a story. This form, the hero's journey, helps with scene, as the hero goes somewhere and then returns. There is character development, though it is archetypical and often stereotypical. But the hero's journey is also a form heavily focused on plot, which is why it also works for what we think of as plot-heavy genres like maybe fantasy. All you have to do is follow these steps from 1 to 12 or 1 to 9, whichever version you want to follow. In fact, so many movies use this formula that many of us can predict how most blockbuster movies in the US are going to go, which is to say that it is actually a very Western and very male form. It is a form to express the adventure and risk that has defined white masculinity. That white masculinity goes forth, it conquers, it brings the bacon, the ring, the sword, whatever, back home. And further examination shows that it is a form about white masculine coming of age. The hero isn't generally, for example, married with children. That would make his leaving an abandonment, not a heroic journey. This isn't to say that the form is bad. It's just that the form has these inherent limitations, as all forms do. This is in part the pleasure of working within and against form. So what if we push the hero's journey? What happens, for example, if we make our hero a woman? What happens if we really take her femaleness into consideration? Not just make a girl, but keep her journey looking pretty much the same as with the boys. Does she meet a goddess, or does she encounter her own self? And what if the hero isn't young? Does he lose the ordeal because he doesn't have both the strength and the naivete? In my own novel, Monster in the Middle, I work each chapter story through a different form of fiction. I thought first about what the form is meant to do, and if that meaning is subverted when I put my own skill set and preoccupations to work. In my story, The Special World, I asked what would happen if I put a young black man into this white male structural form of the hero's journey. I also asked, what might this form, the hero's journey, have to say about black male coming of age specifically? And one of the things I figured out when working through this form is that the lone black man doesn't often get to be a hero in our culture. In fact, the lone black man is often victimized by police brutality and other kinds of anti-black realities. But when we are a posse, when we are a team, when we are a collective, that is often when we are able to get to heroism. So that's something that the form and pushing against the form allowed me to realize in my own writing.
I think we have time for questions if anybody has questions. I see Mike. Oh, I think I'm supposed to ask Rob to come up and not take questions. But as Rob comes up, I do want to say something based on something that both of you said in response to one of the questions I asked. Writing is a solitary act, and so it can get lonely. It's nice to have friends. It's good to have friends. It's good to be a part of a community, such that when you come away from your computer screen or your pen or your paper or your deep reading, that something and somebody's there, though you have disappeared. You know this if you're a writer. You know you feel when you come away from your writing, you're like, oh, wait, I live here? This is my house? That's not my house that I was just writing about? Do y'all understand what I mean? What's really important to me about this book, about Hurston Wright, about Cave Canem, where I met Camille, is that they create for us, books do this. I believe this about books. I know books do this because books did this for me when I was a kid growing up in Shreveport, Louisiana. Books create for us community. It makes somebody who has been through what we're going through available to us, right? And it makes available to us somebody who's going through something we will never go through, such that we know what is available to the world. And so part of what I really love about this book is that it's a book that gives you a community. And I'm really happy that I was able to be a part of that. Now we'll take questions. Thank you so much.
As Jericho said, we have mics on both sides. Please come up and ask questions. The point, too, of me having you ask questions and me doing this is so that you can ask Jericho questions, too. After all, he's talked a lot about working on this anthology, but, not about his own work. So please, go ahead.
Hello.
Hi.
My name is Catherine, and I wanted to ask about the nonfiction side and how you incorporated that in the book, because I know you've talked a lot about fiction, but I was more interested in nonfiction, especially my writing is more centered around like my professional work and sort of my journey in my career.
Yeah, that's a really great question. This book is actually interested in memoir, other kinds of nonfiction, screenplays, obviously fiction and poetry. Part of the reason why I'm really excited to have Tiffany and Camille here in particular is that they are writers without boundaries. They are writers without genres. Tiffany writes plays, fiction, poetry. I could kill her. She's working on a nonfiction book now. As you know, Camille writes essays. She writes poems. She's an anthologist. Tiffany is also working on editing kinds of things. So the book does get into nonfiction. For instance, there's an essay by Ralph Eubanks in the book that I love so much because it's ultimately an essay about place. It's an essay about Mississippi, which seems to me a very important place in the Black mind. There's a way that when you're Black, if you've never been to Mississippi, it somehow seems to be a part of your mindscape, which I'm really interested in, what Black people have in common in their mindscape. What happens when I say the word Mississippi to Black people that doesn't happen to everybody else? And so I do think that's there in the book. The other thing that essay does that's really interesting is it makes use of a poem by Natasha Trethewey in order to talk about how Ralph Eubanks goes about making his work. Interestingly enough, Natasha Trethewey is from Mississippi. She has an essay in the book where she's also talking about place. And so much of what the work I was doing in any genre, even if I haven't written or published in that genre, much of the work I was doing became easy for me because many of the writers in this book are talking to one another without knowing that they were talking to one another. Everybody mentions somebody else in the book. It makes me so happy. So I hope that helps to answer your question.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yes, good afternoon. First, I'd like to say thank you to the Library of Congress for holding this event, and I'd like to thank you all for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just a two-part question, one for Ms. Tiffany and one for Ms. Camille. Ms. Tiffany, you indicated that your mother was the first person that put you in danger and that she was also the first person that delivered you to safety. Did you resent your mother for that past experience, and how do you personalize that experience in your writing? And Ms. Camille, you spoke about the construction and the craft. How many hours a day do you spend writing, and do you start with an outline first, or do you just start writing? And excuse me, or do you just start writing about what you're thinking about? What is your process?
Oh, y'all got questions.
Yeah. I said it took me all this bravery and I felt so vulnerable to say it, and now you're making me say more. But the question actually is a writerly question too, because I think the way that I am processing this is through my writing. You know, I've often been asked, like, what are my themes in my writing? And my answer has always been that my themes are around belonging. And I've often said, well, it's about, you know, that anxiety of belonging comes from being from the Virgin Islands, and, you know, are we Americans or are we Caribbean people? Are we both? We don't find acceptance from either place sometimes, and so we feel like we're sort of lost and abandoned. And so I talk about that as the root of my desire to write about belonging. But what I recognize that I've been doing all along is actually talking about my mother, indirectly thinking about what it meant to have been abandoned by her when I was a baby, and what that has meant for me to then belong to my grandmother. And both of those things were really vital, like, elements of my life. I think my whole life I didn't experience resentment, at least not consciously, towards my mother. My grandmother, in her incredibly capacious love, also held my mother up with empathy, and I understood that my mother had ushered me into safety by allowing my grandmother to take me. But as an adult and someone who is a mother now myself, I can also recognize that there were times when I was in danger, that my mother's inability to take care of me did put me in danger too, and that part of my work itself has been like working through that anxiety that I, in many ways, don't always have access to because I was a baby, right? Like, I don't remember a lot of it, but it's in me. And the writing has been a way to think that through intellectually and emotionally. Now, the thing I want to say before I hand over your hard question to Camille is that my mother was a writer before me, and so was my grandmother. So the other thing that both these women gave me was their love of literature, their love of poetry and fiction, because my grandmother was a fiction writer, my mother was a poet, and I am now both. That they gave me both those things, and that even holding me in danger and in safety is an important reality of being a writer too. And being able to hold those two things together, for me, is like where I meet my writing, and how I make my way through my writing.
So, if I recall, your question is how long do I write every day?
Do you write, yes, how many hours a day do you spend writing?
Hours. Sorry, I'm sorry.
Hours. I love it. That's very funny.
So that really depends on what moment in my life you're asking me that question, right? So when I was single and not a mother, I could have been like 12, 15 hours a day. I've got a person in my house who will not put up with that. And it's her job not to put up with that, right now. And so sometimes I get 20 minutes a day. Sometimes that's all I get. My new nonfiction narrative started in the middle of COVID, when I thought I was gonna be home. I got a Guggenheim, it was great. I wasn't gonna have to teach, I was gonna get to be home and write a whole book, and then no, I guess I'm homeschooling a 4th grader. That's what this year's gonna be. And so I had 20 minutes a day that I could just be by myself, and this exercise that I write about, saved me, right? It saved me to be able to sit and breathe and pay animal bright attention to what was happening and recording everything that was going on for 20 minutes, so that when I finally did have time, I had these records, as opposed to being like, I'll remember that, I won't, or being so deeply caught up in just the words or the ideas, as opposed to having them sort of centrally rooted. And so wherever I am in my life, I will find a way to think like a writer and move through the world as a writer. But sometimes it's really, I've had periods where it was 2 minutes a day, right? Like I was just so traumatized, things were going on, life was hard. My little Fitbit would ring, and for 2 minutes, I would write down whatever was write down worthy in a tiny $1.50 notebook that I kept in my purse. And that was it, that was all I had. And eventually, that adds up with that sort of constant attention. And then when I do have time, I can create a poem or an essay or something from it. I feel like that idea that writers have hours a day, that also is very racialized and class-based, right? There was this time in the 1950s where those like major writers would literally leave their house in a suit and tie with a briefcase and go to the office to write their novels, because that's a statement about the value that this culture puts on art, right? That in order for it to have value, you have to treat it like an office job. But the great Lucille Clifton, when people would ask her why her poems were so short, she said, "That's how long my children napped."
Thank you.
Thank you. Next question.
Can I say to this question, I do write every day, but I know for a fact that Louise Glick does not. Okay.
Peace. My name is Nubian Scholar. And firstly, I want to thank you for the blessings that you are. You've lifted many souls and encouraged many lives. And my grandmother's always taught me to give people their roses while they're still living. So as I sat here, I wanted to make sure I gave you your roses.
Thank you.
And on another note, I'm here for a practical reason. I want to learn and get as many contacts I can for literary agents. I've written my first manuscript. The book proposal is done. And as I went on this brief journey, a foray into this literary world, you find out that it's not diverse, very insular. Many might say racist. It's a $70 billion industry. And one book can fundamentally change your life. And as I developed the manuscript, I then expanded into a series called Feel the Heal, 60 minutes to read for a lifetime of what you need. So it's going to be a whole series of books incorporating hip-hop, social media, the work of Ivan Pavlov, covering a whole range of wellness. And so what I want to know, brothers and sisters, help plug me into some literary agents so we can bring this to the public.
That's less of a craft question, but
Maybe, Tiffany, maybe you can say something about how to go about getting an agent.
I'd be happy to do that. Yeah, I will say that it is not easy to get an agent. And it took me years to find an agent. And I got rejected a number of times. And I was rejected for straight up racist ass reasons. Oh, shoot, I'm not supposed to curse, we're on TV.
come on. C-SPAN, please take that
And
out.
they'll bleep that out. So I want to say first and foremost that the journey you're on is the journey that we have all been on, and the rejection is always part of being an artist, right? So that's the important thing to say. I will also say that the way that many of us found our agents was through direct mentorship. So in my case, that meant like going to a literary conference, taking a class with someone. You know, we're unlikely to be on stage and just tell you the name of our agent. Our agent would be very mad at us if we did that. But what got me my agent, and I'm sure my story is not so different from the other folks on this panel, is by being in menteeship to someone else who then could see me as a valuable mentee and then want to open up their resources to me. So that meant taking, like I said, taking classes, going to workshops, going to conferences, and apprenticing myself to writers who I admired. So that's my advice to anybody who's looking to professionalize, which is to find the writers you admire and apprentice yourself to these writers in things like Hurston Wright and other kinds of workshops like that.
Rob, can I do a thing real quick with the 2 minutes we have?
You go, you do what you
Can
need to
y'all
do.
just ask the question part of your question, only the four of you, very quickly, one right after the other? We'll start right here. Yes, sir. The question part of your question.
I was just wondering, like, how, similar to him, how do you reach out and how do you break through into the industry? Because that's something I've been trying to do for a long time.
Right behind you.
how do you demonstrate that you are knowledgeable about craft while separating it from the content? The reason why I asked that question is because I have been someone who has submitted to agents and to magazines for some time, and one of the, not criticisms I'll get for certain pieces, but what I'll get is, you're a great writer, make it mainstream. They mean white. So how can I demonstrate that I am knowledgeable about craft in my writing without going completely mainstream to something that might be hackneyed or cliched?
Okay, right here. Yeah.
Hi. So my question is, I'll just do the question part. Hopefully the context will reveal itself to you.
Yeah.
But how is your experience with undoing as you kind of uncover and recover your own unique Black voice after having read a bunch of, like you mentioned, the colonized writings? How has that then shown up in the way you use your craft? And then the second part of my question is, what is a source of great stability and love for you right now?
In a talk earlier, S.A. Cosby said, inspiration is a myth, either you'll write or you won't. And I want to know what your thoughts are on that as people who struggle to get started. What is your thoughts on that?
Who said that?
S.A. Cosby, he was in a talk earlier today.
Yeah, I mean, I do believe that you have to sit down. You have to sit down and do it, be it for 1 minute at a time or 8 hours at a time. And for all of this, that sort of source of stability, mine is whatever mine is, but you have to find what yours is. Otherwise, you don't have the strength to keep doing what you need to do and to make the connections and et cetera. So finding that source of stability and trust and belief and home in your community and all that, that's crucial.
I am very sorry that we could not get to these questions, but we do have to do a book signing. So maybe if you ask us those questions there, we will definitely answer them. Thank you so much for coming here. Hey, I think it's a good idea for you to buy this thing. You might want to go get this thing. Thank you. God bless you. Thank y'all. Thank you, Camille. Thank you.